What's up, everybody, and welcome back to my studio. I'm Joseph Finchum, and you're you, and today we're drawing water splashes. So let's get started. I start doing this water splash by working in a mid-tone gray. Since this is going to be a black and white drawing, I want something I can see to start with over the black, and I'll change my values going up into lighter grays and down into darker grays as we go. Right now what I'm doing is I'm using the midtones to put in most of the shape and form of this droplet splash. I'm trying to keep in mind that the splashes are always going to be going in an arc. Wherever the drop hits a surface, it's going to splash up and out, and the arc of descent is going to take the splashes and individual droplets always in an arcing pattern. And while I keep that in mind, really, all I'm intending to do right now is build the form. Now I've changed to a slightly lighter gray, and I'm starting not to add highlights, but a little bit more body to each individual piece, making certain parts stand out while other parts stay the mid-tone. One of the things I like to do is as I switch through my values and go lighter, I'll go through a bunch of different parts of the water splash, and I'll put the lighter value that I'm working with now in certain spots. But then when I switch to an even lighter color or go down into a darker gray, I won't use them in all of the same spots. Sometimes I will, sometimes I won't. It gives a little bit more definition to the water in general. As I go along, I'm trying to keep in mind that water has surface tension. And as it stretches out, it's going to naturally split. Generally, towards the end of a stretched piece of water, at its first split, there is a slightly larger droplet. That droplet is not going to be perfectly round. Because it usually has just split off of the stretched piece, it has a little bit of wobble to it as gravity is trying to force it back into a circle. Pieces further out are going to be smaller droplets, and they're also going to be closer to being perfectly round. They don't have to be. It's up to you to decide what you want it to look like. And when drawing them, don't think that they have to go like big, medium, little. This isn't necessary. Water doesn't split that way. It has a tendency to form different sized droplets in a row. So the first one will be oddly shaped, mostly round, of course, but you can make it look like pretty much anything, as long as it looks like maybe multiple drops forming into one drop. It's really up to you, but you really don't want any sharp points. I'm not actually going to show you how to draw a single water drop. Other people have done it. Lisa of Lockery Fine Art has an excellent video on water droplets, and I'll pop an info card up here so you can go and check that out if you want to. All you really need to know about water droplets is that light has an easier time passing into the water than it does coming out of the water. So your highlight is going to be on the opposite side of your light source. When you draw a solid object, the highlights face towards the light. When you draw water droplets, the highlights have a tendency to be on the other side, but they will also have a smaller reflection back towards the light source. Now we're moving on to the second drop, and I'm not going to lie here. If you look really closely at the canvas, you can see the faint outline of where I had already done this. I painted for about an hour and a half before I realized I never turned my camera on. It's a rookie mistake, but I made it. So I got some white paint out, I gave a couple of coats to it, and once it was as covered as I was going to get it, I hit record and I started over. In this one, of course, it's a light background, so we're letting the color of the water shine through. Is the water going to be this blue? Probably not, unless in your drawing or painting, your water splash happens to be reflecting the sky. But since this is a color painting, I figured I would give it the blue tones, because your mind's going to know exactly what I'm going for anyway. In this one, I'm doing the exact same thing by starting with a mid-tone. Then I start building highlights. And I continue to build highlights and define the values as I go. As in the first splash, I first defined my form and shape, and then I started to build on it. Since water is reflective, I spend a lot of time trying to make sure my highlights are facing in the right directions. And with each time I lighten the color, I also come back and go a little bit darker. The last couple of steps I'll do for this colored drop is to put in some darker blues on most of the leading edges, because building that contrast is going to make it pop off of the page a little bit more. As I move into my brighter highlights, I'm still not using white yet, but I am moving closer towards it. As I go, I just continue to mix paints by adding a little bit more white into it, mixing it up, and then I start using that. Every now and then, I'll go back into the darker color and go over some of the highlights I've done already, because this helps to build layering and it helps to build transparency in your water droplets. Now, no camera is perfect, so I'm sure some of this isn't going to show as well as I want it to. But hopefully in the still image I'll put at the end of each piece, you'll be able to see exactly what I'm talking about. As I move into the next panel, we're going to do a wave in this one, or more of a wavy shape. It's still more of a splash than it is a wave, but it's going to have the shape of a wave, is what I'm getting at. Instead of starting with a mid-tone on this one, I'm starting with a much darker gray. The technique I'm doing with this one is more building from dark to light than in the other one where I started with the mid-tone and went darker and lighter as I went. There are going to be a few spots in this where the water will be very translucent, and the thinner the water is, the more of the background you're going to want to see through it. So I'm building this from my darks to my lights in order to make sure that I leave enough of that thin black coming through the background. Because I'm starting with a much darker gray on this one, when I get to like a mid-value gray in this piece, it'll almost look like I'm putting on white. But if you keep watching, you'll notice that it still increases to get more lighter in value as I approach the actual white. In this one, there is actually very little white being put in, and it's only in a few small spots towards the end of the painting. As I continue to adjust my values, I'm still trying to remember to keep the highlight opposition in my thoughts. It's very easy for your brain to go, hey, the highlight's on this side because that's where your light source is coming from. But with water, it usually isn't that way. As I said earlier, the light passes into the water a lot easier than it passes out. And as it passes out, it refracts through the bent shape of the water, or the circular shape of the water, causing the far edge to appear brighter than the leading edge. And as long as you keep that in mind, your water's going to look like it has the right highlights. I try and leave a couple of larger filled sections of the dark gray and even some of the black in small places throughout this wavy splash in order to represent that curved nature that water gets. Everything is always trying to be round. Whether that's rounding inward or outward depends on how the water is reacting with the air around it. The more of an appearance of overlapping you can give, the more you'll see it as being transparent. The best thing about acrylics is as long as the paint is dry, you can go right over it. You can erase things out of existence. So now we'll move on to the next piece. In this piece, I'm going for definitely a different look. I kind of wanted to make this look like somebody was throwing water through the air and it was splashing over like a rounded object. Maybe a skull shape is what I was going for. I don't know if I pulled it off in this one. Does it look like water splashing through the air and kind of forming that rounded shape as it folds over air pressure? Yes. Does it look like a skull? Maybe. Again, in this one, I started with a mid-tone, and I concentrated more on leaving more of the white showing through it, rather than having to go back in later with the white to make highlights. But I will do that because I want there to be a layering effect to add to that transparency. You don't have to do all of your highlights with paint. You can actually leave some of the canvas showing through, as long as you plan for that ahead of time. The effect I was going for in the larger splash towards the bottom was that of like a ball of water falling apart, or if you've ever seen one of those stop motion pictures of someone popping a bubble, that's the look I was going for. But I wanted it to be a little bit more thick and have a little bit more body to it. In most of those bubble pictures I've seen, you get a lot more tiny little bubbles that sort of form the shape of where the bubble was. And I didn't want that. I wanted it to look more like it was splashing over something that was maybe round and invisible. If you've ever seen a show about meteor strikes, you may have seen a representation of an airburst. That's basically the effect I was going for. Like air coming down, hitting a pocket of air pressure, and bursting outward around an invisible object. And in this painting, I'm doing just like before. I'm starting with a mid-tone. I'm going into some lighter tones. Then I'm going back in with some dark tones. You just gotta keep switching it up. The more you switch it up, the more it's going to have that appearance of being three-dimensional. As I get closer to being finished with this, I start to put in a little bit of that turquoisey color, a little more of a seafoam blue-green color. And I'm using that to try and represent darker spots like there are on the front, but on the back side. So it gives it a little bit more of a three-dimensional look. You're seeing the transparency of those colors through the back of the water. And there we have it. All 4 of the splashes right there for you to view. I hope you enjoyed this video. I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Remember, if you're new to my channel, you can subscribe by clicking here. Or you can watch some of my other videos by clicking here and here. Well, that's it. So long. Have a good day, everybody. Bye.